Hi, I'm Mike Bush.
I'm Paul New.
And I'm Colleen Sterling. Welcome to Ask the A&Ps from AOPA.
On Ask the A&Ps, we take your toughest maintenance questions and we try to solve them. We don't always solve them, but we try to solve them. So if you have a question, please reach out to us at podcasts@aopa.org.
If you like the show, make sure to follow and subscribe so you never miss an episode.
And if you'd like to get on our email list for our monthly newsletter and occasional interesting maintenance stories, the easiest way to do that is to text the word SAVVY, SAVVY, to 33777, and a little email bot will put you on our mailing list. Again, text SAVVY, SAVVY, to 33777 to put yourself on the list.
Here we are again.
Groundhog Day, right? Oh no, that was last week. We just watched that movie. So I wanted to talk about, I have an airplane in the engine, in the avionics shop, having a new engine monitor put in because my old engine monitor didn't cut the mustard. It only recorded 2 hours of data at a time. And you had to do a handstand on one hand to get the data out of the monitor. So it was definitely past its prime.
Wow.
You're not going to mention what kind of monitor that was.
It was an old monitor. It was from 2001. So
JPI 700.
It was not a JPI. This is an experimental.
Oh.
Is it MGM?
No.
No, not
it's
that one.
MG.
Okay.
No. I don't want to make anybody feel bad. They've since upgraded the engine monitor, but when the airplane builder was building the airplane, he bought an engine monitor, and then by the time he got the airplane done, it was already 5 years down the road, and then by the time I got the airplane, it was 20 years down the road. So this thing was a little long in the tooth.
Yeah.
So I'm going with a Garmin, and I'm very excited about that. I feel like I'm improving the airplane, but I have to say, I go almost every other day to check on the progress and see how they're doing and what's going on. And the airplane looks like it's having brain surgery. I mean, the whole panel on that side is out, and all the circuit breakers are lying there, and there's wires everywhere. And all I can think is, how the heck do these guys know what these wires were connected to? I mean,
They really don't.
Anytime I've ever taken my airplane to an avionics shop, I always have this feeling it's never going to fly again. When you see it in that condition, with all its guts hanging out, it's like there's no way they're ever going to be able to put this thing back together.
And this wasn't a certified airplane with beautiful wiring diagrams. There were scribbled wiring diagrams and pinouts and things like that. But they're finding things like, why did he do it this way? Or what is this wire? And how do they do this? And I teach electrical and avionics in A&P school, but we just do the 4313 by the book stuff. This wire connects to this wire with this kind of terminal, and 3 grounds to any grounding point. And I mean, there's no offense to the builder because he was very meticulous, but I think the airplane was over engineered. There's a lot of wiring and a lot of nice little options and lights and switches and stuff that I'm just afraid that I'm going to try to go flying and I'm not going to have any, gear down and lock lights because that was in this plug, and they eliminated this plug, and it's a frightening prospect.
Well, I'm guessing that they tag a lot of wires when they take it apart.
Yeah, there's all kinds of labels on all these wires.
I'm also guessing that every so often they get into one of these, I don't know where this wire goes, but let's get out the ohmmeter and see if we can figure it out mode.
Basic skills, yeah. But that adds to the labor, right? So, I'm just glad they're doing it and not me. I mean, I'm embarrassed to say I'm taking my airplane.
You're glad they're doing it, but not you until you get the invoice.
Yeah. But it makes me appreciate how much of my time it would have been, and I could never do it as professionally as they're doing it. They're doing a beautiful job.
No, you'd be paralyzed by fear.
I would be paralyzed by fear. You know me too well.
I just put a test flight yesterday, a digital autopilot in my Cirrus, and I put in the Garmin, and it's I had a little trouble. I was working with the avionics shop doing this, and there's a lot of frustration because I'm an old avionics guy. I mean, when I left avionics, GPS was a rumor, and we were installing IFR LORAN. So those of you that know this stuff know how old that is. And I was having a real problem in that the servos are all on a CAN bus. Each servo has power and ground and a CAN bus, which is basically twisted pair of wires. And that's it. And I'm from the world of, you have 80 pounds of wiring for an autopilot. And when I used to work for a little commuter airline, we had Hadley Page jet streams, not BAE jet streams, but Hadley Page jet streams. And I put in dual audio panels in these two airplanes. They had a single keying audio panel. This is back in the early 80s. And so all this work was done at night, and I was much younger then. And the director of maintenance and the president of the company came into the hangar one night. It's about 1 o'clock in the morning, so I can only imagine where they had been. And here's this 20-year-old kid, and I've got these massive wiring harnesses hanging over my shoulders that I had pre-built, and I had carried them into the airplane. The airplane's gutted. The instrument panels are all gone, and I'm sitting on a milk crate in between what was the pilot and co-pilot seat, and I'm sort of straddling the center console. And I'm getting ready to lay these harnesses in the airplane. And these two guys came in, they looked at me, and I don't know, I'm 20 or 21, and I'm the only guy doing this. I've got a week to get it done. This is day 2, I think.
Yeah.
And I looked around, and I don't know that I've ever seen the look of panic on 2 adult men like I saw that. But that's what I'm used to, lots of wires. And this digital autopilot basically had 2. And I had to call and say, are you sure that aren't there some more wires that go here? No, that's it.
I've always thought that these airplanes had way too many wires. I don't understand why everything in the airplane just doesn't have an Ethernet port on it.
I've actually asked that question because in the Garmin, you've got Ethernet, you have CAN bus, 232, 422, and all these, and they all carry different data. Like, why not just have the one bus? Surely, if a computer can send data back and forth over the internet via Ethernet, that goes really fast. That's got to be enough. I agree. I think one bus ought to do it, but I'm sure somebody's got a reason for it.
Our first question is from Jim, who wants to know how much carbon is too much. Go ahead, Jim.
Okay, let me first say that I'm just very honored to be in such a esteemed company. I mean, you folks, I've been listening to all your podcasts, and it's been amazing. And I've been in aircraft maintenance engaged for 49 years, and I'm still picking up hints and tips from you guys that help me operate my own airplane. So
cool.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I have a Cessna 182 0470R, good engine, bad induction system, the whole 9 yards. And I got an overhaul about 1,100 hours ago, brand new Millennium cylinders. And since then, I've changed 2 cylinders for exhaust valves, and that's another whole story. I'm not going to do that again after looking at all the data and seeing all the podcasts, and obviously lapping valves is the way to go. But in any event, the oil consumption has climbed steadily over the years, and now I'm doing about 5 hours to 1 quart. But I am noticing in the filter there's a lot of carbon, and probably the 2 cylinder changes were over the last 3 years. Prior to that, the carbon kept building to the point where I had probably a good full teaspoon of carbon I could get out of the filter. And I noticed with the cylinder changes, there's less carbon, but there's still a fair amount. And my real question is, can this be harming anything, the carbon itself? I mean, I suspect it's coming from from the oil control rings, letting the oil get carboned up. But I'm just more concerned, not so much about the oil consumption, but about the carbon itself in the filter.
Well, the carbon itself isn't going to do any damage, but it's indicative of a problem that I think it'd be worth expending some effort to run down. The carbon in the oil, I mean, it means basically that oil is getting cooked probably by excessive blow-by in one or more cylinders. And it's not the oil control rings that are responsible for that. It's the compression rings. If a lot of combustion gases are getting by the compression rings in one of the cylinders, then that's going to cook a bunch of oil and carbonize it and wind up in the oil filter.
And the other clue that you had blow by was you said the oil gets black after oil changes. You said the oil gets black very quickly. That means the blow by products are getting past all the rings and getting into the crankcase, or the oil is mixing with the combustion gases and getting dirty too quickly. You might, and you also said it comes out the crankcase vent. That was another indication that you're pressurizing
the crankcase, right?
Right.
So all of these symptoms are pointing at the same thing, and the guess is that the culprit is one of the cylinders that aren't the ones you replaced recently.
That would be
so. I mean, what you really need to do is compression check and bore scope inspection and see if you can figure out which cylinder is the culprit.
Yeah, I've been doing that probably about every 6 months. I mean, when I change the oil at 6 months, I pretty much do a mini annual on the engine and looking the cylinders, the borescope check, and compression checks. And compressions are good in the 70s, low 70s.
Wow.
And the borescope looks good. Now, a few cylinders I've noticed some vertical lines, but nothing exaggerated or.
Yeah, some vertical scoring is pretty normal.
Yeah.
Are you noticing any oil puddling in any of the cylinders?
Not really. The plugs are all dry. I clean the plugs every 6 months, and they seem pretty dry. And I'm looking at the heads of the pistons. I don't notice any oil.
It would be down at the bottom, or in the spark plugs, like you said.
Yeah.
I wish my engine was doing just a quart in 5 hours instead of a quart in less than 5 hours.
I know it'd be great to have better consumption.
Paul isn't going to say. He doesn't want to embarrass himself.
But going back to the question about the carbon, Jim, Mike's saying that it's not really harmful. Mike, could it possibly get into the vernotherm or the anything that would prevent things from closing properly, maintaining
carbon
oil pressure?
The carbon is
soft.
Typically very tiny particles and very soft particles. So I as I said, I don't think of the carbon as being as causing any risk, but I do think of it as being symptomatic that there's excessive blow by, and then all these other things all seem to confirm that there's excessive blow by. And it's probably not like all the cylinders that are doing that. It's probably just one or maybe two cylinders that are doing that.
Yeah.
Well, when the carbon breaks loose, the first place it goes is to the oil sump. The second place it goes is to the filter.
The filter.
So
the filter's doing its job.
The filter's doing its job. I wouldn't have much concern about that.
Well, unless there was so much carbon that it would plug the filter and put it into bypass, but
a teaspoon isn't going to do that.
Yeah,
no, it's not that much.
I don't know of any guidance from
Teaspoon's
Continental on how much is too much or how
There's
much.
no guidance from Continental. I bet Continental to come out with a service bulletin like homing.
You dared them to.
And they won't do it.
You double dog dared them.
So that we have to use
here's the carbon that I got out of the last filter
Oh, look
change.
at that.
Oh, yeah.
And like I said, it's gone down since the cylinder changes, but it's still there.
Maybe it's all breaking away and self-cleaning.
Yeah, that is a lot. That would surprise me too. I don't think I've seen that much. But it's not metal.
Other than tearing into the engine, can I operate this way until some other parameter gets concerning? Or
I think you can.
Oil's cheap. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Keep monitoring the filter, as Mike was saying. Once it,
I'm thinking
totally coated, it could be an issue.
The one thing I'm thinking is that you might want to shorten your oil and filter change interval because that is a bit of a scary amount.
Are you going
again,
50 hours?
my concern
Yeah,
is
50.
that we don't want the filter to get plugged up.
Hmm.
Because if the filter gets too plugged up, then the bypass valve will open, and you'll wind up passing unfiltered oil into the oil galleries.
Yeah, okay, and that's good, because my big concern, like you said, was like Colleen mentioned, maybe something getting clogged. Not so much the vernitherm, but I'm thinking of an oil jet inside somewhere,
Yeah.
and I just want to get a feeling for that.
How many hours a year do you fly the airplane, roughly?
80 to 85.
That's good.
That's good. Yeah.
Okay, so you will probably only do 2 oil changes a year.
Right.
So generally, we like to see at least 3 oil changes a year, 4 months as a maximum. So you might want to go to a 4-month cycle instead of a 6-month cycle.
Yeah,
That's what
good
Continental
advice.
recommends.
Well, that's what Mike recommends too.
Yeah.
I came to it independently of Continental.
Well, anytime that we can do something and agree with the manufacturer, I think we should pat ourselves on the back.
Yeah.
I think Ed Collin was pushing for 3 months.
Wow.
3 months and 35 hours. That's
a
pretty
lot of oil.
conservative. That's pretty
Yeah.
conservative.
Yeah.
Oh, he's probably getting kickback from Shell or something.
Yeah, I'm sure you've noticed the price of oil, it just keeps climbing.
I know.
Mm.
I know. Yeah.
But that's good advice. I didn't think of that, but to go down to a 35-hour oil change or something 3 times a year.
Are you having an oil analysis performed?
Yeah, and
Okay.
it's been doing pretty good.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Maybe
Sounds
shorten
pretty-
it down, see what it does.
Yeah.
What oil lab do you use?
Aero Labs, I think it is.
AvLabs?
Av Labs, excuse me, Av Labs, yeah. Yep. And it's been running good. Sometimes it's a little bit higher, like chrome, but then it goes back down, and there's variations from test to test.
Yep. As long as it kind of stays around a normal.
Yeah, and there's
Doesn't
very little
strip.
metal in the filter. I mean, metal-wise, the filters are looking good.
The cylinders are Millennium steel cylinders?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, cylinders are disposable items on an airplane, right? They're wear items. They're bolt on.
Yeah,
and
but
remove.
you've got to figure out which one's the culprit. You don't
Yeah.
want to start pulling cylinders at random.
Yeah. So he's bore scoping like he should
So
be.
I think you live with the problem, you reduce your oil change interval, and then eventually the culprit cylinder will rear its ugly head because it'll get really, really bad. And
You'll start seeing oil on the plugs. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds like real good advice. Definitely puts my mind at ease a little bit.
It's a lot cheaper than changing the cylinders out.
yeah,
Oh, yeah, a lot less work.
we don't like to see cylinders removed before their time.
No, and after reading some of the stuff, I get paranoid about the bearing press and all that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yep.
I don't want to touch them, as far as removing them goes.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's like living with that bad appendix until it really gets bad. And then go for the surgery.
Oh, man.
Sorry.
Mine went bad when I was in 3rd grade.
Oh, really?
Oh,
Wow.
yeah.
I still have mine.
I still have mine that I know of.
I haven't had mine since 3rd grade.
Well,
Boy, that was a diversion there. Squirrel.
yeah. Great question, Jim. Thanks for calling the doctors here at the clinic.
And I'll
That
keep
was
an
a
eye
good
on my
question.
appendix too.
Yeah. Keep checking that appendix
Okay.
every 35
Thanks,
hours.
Thank you for calling.
See you, Jim.
I'll see you. Thanks.
Our next question is from Dustin, who's concerned whether all mechanics might be crooked. Good to see you, Dustin.
Thanks for
This
having
is
me.
dangerous territory you're treading on here.
Well, luckily it's virtual, so I don't have to worry about any physical attacks. But proud AOPA member, appreciate what you guys are doing. This, fortunately, I can say, although maybe it happened to me and it was unknown. Friend in a pilot's forum posed a question, really kind of asking how people feel or if they know what's happened. Had an engine his shop was recommending for overhaul. Some email communications between him and the director of maintenance, as well as the engine shops directly. So all 3 of them tied into an email chain. kind of discussing options and looking at some quotes. One of those shops emailed back the director of maintenance with excluding the pilot owner and offered a $2,000 referral fee for his work. And the director of maintenance, to his credit, was open enough with the pilot to tell him directly, hey, this is what they've offered me, and I'm willing to pass it on to you if that's what you decide. The big questions that came up, first of all, is this a common practice? Secondly, really was how people felt about this. I mean, most of us, maybe we're naive, but we feel like when we go to the shop, we like to be able to trust the DOM or trust the A&P as to what their recommendations are and that they're looking out for our best interests. Yes, it's a business. They got to make money. They got to do well. We understand that. Just like we expect things to be bought at wholesale and, and a markup to retail prices. Mm-hmm. But something like this seemed kind of disturbing to at least some of us in the chats and the forums to say, hey, this seems a little more like a bribe or coercion. And especially if the DOM wasn't upfront to tell the pilot owner, it seems like they could be much more likely to maybe steer you towards a shop that might not be the best for what you're looking for.
It isn't, we don't experience that. I have 4 or 5 engine shops that I deal with, and I don't, maybe they bribe other shops and not me. Maybe I'm losing out. I don't know. There is a very large engine shop that gives kickback is not the right word.
A discount?
No, it's not a discount.
A rebate.
Incentive.
A rebate, incentive, yeah. Depending on what term you use, it sounds better, right? Kickback sounds underhanded, whereas rebate sounds fair. And I never quite figured out why this one shop, they'll give the buyer of the engine, meaning the shop, $1,000 bonus, kickback, whatever. And I'm thinking, why don't you just have a markup and state a wholesale price and a retail price? Mm-hmm. Because as you say, everyone kind of accepts that. And
well, that's effectively what they're doing.
Exactly, except
but they don't call it that.
They don't call
well,
it that.
Well, it doesn't matter what they call it. I mean, look, if you buy a part through your shop, you expect them to purchase it at wholesale and sell it to you at retail. That's just the way the world works.
Oh, it is. That's not what I'm saying.
If you don't want to do that, then you need to purchase it yourself. I mean, for parts that don't have astronomically high prices, that's just kind of something that we accept. And for things like engines that do have astronomically high prices, I always recommend that the owner purchase the engine directly and have it drop shipped to the shop, which not only eliminates any sort of wholesale retail business, but it also often allows you to not pay sales tax, which is a big chunk of money on an engine.
Sure. And I'm not disagreeing. I'm just explaining this is how the system usually works. Usually we have a wholesale price, that's what we pay, and then we turn around and we add something to it. So we kind of have a little, if you want to know how prices work at my shop, if you buy a $50,000 engine in percentages, the markup is going to be very small. We don't make 10%. We don't even make 5% on an engine. If you buy a 56-cent O-ring, by golly, there may be a 200% markup on that. just to take care of the time it takes Helen to write invoices. If we have a local guy come in and wants to buy a bolt or an O-ring or something, we beg them, please don't make us write up an invoice, because it's going to cost us several dollars to create this invoice for this 56-cent.
So you give them away.
Yeah, sure. Or we tell them replace it, because the reason they don't want to buy one from Aircraft Spruce or whatever is they don't want to pay all those costs. They're like, well, that's fine, but we did. So don't buy it, but replace it someday.
And
Actually,
Paul,
Paul says, I'll give you the bolt if you buy me lunch. I think that's the
That'll
Probably,
work too.
yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Paul, do you charge shipping separately for?
Yes.
You do. So
Yeah.
it's not like that resale wholesale thing is it includes shipping. It's basically covering your time to do the invoicing and receive parts and put them in the bins and
Right. So
research what you're shopping for.
yeah, and I know this isn't quite the question that Dustin asked, but just kind of, and every shop does it a little bit differently. We pay a lot of money to have the manuals, to have the
Right.
space to store parts. The time it takes to look up all the part numbers
Right.
that we're going to purchase is not something that we do on the clock. So when we sell a part, the markup on the part is what pays for all of that, all
That's
of
what I
that
figured.
overhead.
Yeah.
And
And
if
if Dustin was talking about a $2,000, whatever he called it, fee on a $40,000 engine, that's 5%, which is not unreasonable for
no, that's not terrible,
an engine.
unless there was already a markup
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
he got this kickback. Really
Well, that
great
doesn't
that the
sound
shop would let him
that
know up
doesn't
front.
sound likely.
Yeah.
Well, so that's where some of the concern I think comes in. One is intent. I mean, we're all human beings, and so unlike our engines, we're not operating and making decisions, just based on pure science. And so I think people can be influenced and can be biased, and that's a concern. I think the thing about the expectation about a markup is you're expecting that's going to come from anybody. So, and part of the issue in this point is that buying direct from the engine shop certainly is a good option and a consideration for a pilot owner, but when they're not sure who to get the work done from, and they're looking to the A&P for advice,
Sure.
that's where this big
that's how-
question comes in, I think.
But that's how the A&P is earning his $2,000.
Right. But what I would rather see then, if that's the case, is why are you allowing one shop to offer perhaps a bribe and not the others? I would rather then see an honest discussion between
Let's
the pilot
not call
owner.
it a bribe. Let's call it a discount, okay? Because
Okay.
that's what it is. And it's very unlikely that only one shop is offering an FBO discount. It's more likely that all shops are doing it. That I don't. It may be that only this one was visible to you, but this is standard practice in the industry.
Really? You think
Yeah,
so,
there's-
Mike?
Yeah,
There's always
if
a
you
markup,
order
sure.
if you order an engine through your mechanic, he will always make a profit on it.
He
And
should.
if you don't want him to make a profit on it, then you have to do it yourself.
The difference is the mechanic determining what that profit's going to be and adding it to the price, or is the
Well,
engine
but that's
shop?
up to the mechanic
determining?
or the shop. So maybe look at it a little differently. If you need an engine, if you need a new engine, which horrible event that you would actually need a new engine, you can only get a brand new engine from, we'll assume this is a Continental. You can
Air
only buy
Power or
it
something.
from Continental through Air Power. And they don't make a whole lot on each one because they sell a bazillion of them every year. And that's where everybody buys them. If I buy an engine from Air Power, I pay the same price as if you buy an engine from Air Power. The difference comes in is when you need engine work, like an overhaul. You do an overhaul by John Jewell or Ram or any of the other shops out there, and how they respond. So I would suggest if you're going to go that route and have your engine overhauled, go onto the forums and say, where have you guys all done it? Don't just rely on your mechanic, because your mechanic, like me, I have 3 or 4 engine shops that I deal with. I'll deal with Bill Cunningham in Tulsa and people that I know, but there are lots of other good engine shops out there. So it's a matter of figuring out which engine shop is going to be the best. And then if you get 10 prices.
Nowadays, it's which engine shop has the shortest backlog.
It has the shortest backlog.
It's like, how quickly can you do this? Oh, well,
Yeah.
you're 9 months and you're 8 months. I'm going to choose the 8-month guy.
So if all of them come, let's just say they all come out with a $40,000 price to you. Does it really matter whether your mechanic makes $2,000 or $5,000 or $2,000 markup with a $3,000 kickback. The price is still $40,000, and you've made the decision where it comes from. But I understand what you're saying, that it feels different because the shop is getting this kickback or whatever. But
Yeah.
that's
Nobody
just
had a
part of
concern
it.
with the shop making money. The concern
Yeah.
was just, are they going to be more influenced to recommend a certain shop
Well,
Conflict of
because of the
interest.
money that
Yep.
they're getting from that
Yep.
shop? And
most,
I guess another way to think about it is if you were paying a service to advise you, on repairs for your plane as it exists, you would expect, since you're paying for that service, you would expect to get unbiased, advice. And if they were getting money from one shop and not others, I mean, that would probably be disturbing to a lot of folks.
I don't think that's really, everyone's going to have a bias. I don't care who they are. They can say they don't. I have a bias because of these handful of shops that I work with, not because I make more money from them, but I'm biased towards them because I know them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know who's putting that engine together. If I call John Jewell or Bill Cunningham or people that I know that I've dealt with for 30 years, I'm dealing with them because I know them, and that's a bias. Now, it may not be a financial bias, but the result is the same. I end up going to different people. And I think your only way around that is to research the sources yourself, whether you buy from the sources directly or not, because some shops may not want to deal with the individuals. They may only want to deal with the shop. But at least you can find out the reputation. And if the shop makes a markup, the shop makes a markup.
I worry about this issue with insurance, which is completely invisible process. I can't see into, what is my broker getting, and is he getting a kickback from some agencies and not others? That makes me very uncomfortable. It probably goes on a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting because certain sectors of the economy, there's federal laws, against things.
I
The
work for
practice
one.
is very
Yes.
widely.
You're right. Conflict of interest is
So
highly scrutinized.
I always recommend that owners get very actively involved in the decision-making process, especially on a big ticket thing like an engine. But if you choose to buy the engine through the shop, there's nothing wrong with going to the mechanic and saying, how much are you making on this? I mean, that's a legitimate question.
Yeah.
And if the answer is more than you're comfortable with, there's also nothing wrong with saying, hey, can we split the difference? There's nothing wrong with negotiating.
Dustin, thanks for the call. We appreciate you coming on.
Thank you very much.
Our next question is from Lori, who isn't sure if she should trust her engine. Go ahead, Lori.
Okay, yeah. Well, I had written up something to try to be complete and concise, but since we're in a hurry, I'll make it even shorter here if I can. Basically, we have a brand new, newly inspected engine. It had broken a push rod, and so we decided to send it into a major engine shop for an inspect and repair as necessary. And it flew well for a while. I mean, we're only like maybe 50 hours after that engine. But when the weather got cooler, I was doing my run up, and the engine started to run roughly when I pulled the carb heat. And that was strange. So what we finally deduced was that in this narrow range of RPMs, like 1400 to 1600, it runs roughly, unless we have it at peak, we've leaned it to peak RPM. Now our airfield's at 7,200 feet, so we always lean. I don't think I've ever run it full rich. And so if you leave it there at peak RPM, it runs smoothly throughout its whole ground run range, below 1,000 to, 2,200, wherever we pull it back. But as we enrich it, like we do for maximum power for takeoff, it begins to run roughly in this RPM range. And so it doesn't matter if you've gotten there by changing to one mag, pulling the carb heat, pulling the throttle. And we think that, well, this did come on when the temperature dropped from like 70s or 80s down to 50s. And it doesn't seem to happen after we've landed after a flight. So there's some temperature dependency here. But it's not like it's just really when the engine's really cold. We had it on the ground playing with it for half an hour, and it was still showing this problem. So my question is, what else should we look at? Can I trust this? Is this just the way things are going to be? It had a rebuilt carburetor, rebuilt mags when they did the inspection.
That was going to be my
Fine wire
question,
spark
if they did
plugs.
something, if they did something with the carburetor.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's about the RPM. It's a little
does-
higher,
doesn't-
but it's not too far from.
I mean,
when it
if you
switches
if
from
if
low
this is
jets to
all
low.
happening at a field elevation of 7,200 RPM, I mean,
7,200 feet.
I can't help but think maybe this is perfectly normal. Well,
But it didn't do it before.
No, it didn't do it before. This is new after we got the engine back and the temperatures got cooler.
So
But-
Paul,
but if you're not, I mean, you should always be lean to maximum RPM or leaner for ground operations, including the run up. I mean,
So-
when you pull the carb heat, it drastically enriches the mixture. So if you're already rich when you do it, it can enrich in the mixture to the point that combustion may not occur in one or more cylinders. What kind of airplane is
Well,
this?
we enrich it. This
It's
is
a
a
172 RG. It has a Lycoming engine.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paul was onto something about the rebuilt carb and the accelerator. You were going to
Well,
talk about the two regimes that it operates in.
There's a transition from it. Now, I'm not a 172 RG engine guy, and I don't see Lycomings much anymore, but I'm pretty sure that it transitions through different jets in the carburetor. So let me ask you a question. When you start the engine and you're taxiing, do you lean during ground operations, or do you just lean prior to takeoff?
No, after it's started and it's running smoothly, which is, very, very shortly, we
Yeah.
pull it back and lean it. Not precisely, but, to
Yeah, just some.
it looks
yeah.
about right,
Yeah,
kinda.
the TLAR system.
And it'll
The TLAR.
usually, right. And it'll usually stumble if I forget to enrich it a little before I start to taxi.
Yeah.
So
It seems to me, I'm agreeing with Mike. I think this may be somewhat normal. You didn't experience it before. You had a different carburetor. Things were set up a little bit different, maybe different jets in the carburetor, different float setup. I mean, it's just different. And the fact that it has a little vibration as you pass through that RPM, I don't think that would be a particular concern. I won't tell you what my engine does when I pass through that RPM, but it's pretty exciting. And, but I don't have a carburetor, so I can't blame it on the carburetor. I think, and Lycoming actually even came out, not specifically for this engine, but for ground runs, for doing your mag checks, they recommend leaning to max RPM before you do a mag check on the restart 172s and 182s and 206s.
And the run up is typically at 2,000 RPM, 1,800 or
1800,
2,000.
2000, yeah. And you'll go, we used to, and you still can, if you get in one of those restart airplanes and do a mag check at full rich, it'll be 200 to 250 RPM drop. And that was normal. And if you lean it, it'll be 80 RPM drop. It's a dramatic difference.
Yeah, I always lean to max RPM for my run up.
Yeah.
But
But leaning to
So-
max
so
RPM for taxi round is good
you
too.
did too, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure that they were doing that too. It's in the POH, so it's
So can I
disturbing.
clarify?
Yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Clarify something with you, Mike, that we should leave it at peak RPM for the run up, but then enriching it like we do, like 1.5 or 2 twists of the knob for takeoff. Because we can't take off at peak RPM. We don't have the power then.
Oh no. You need
Well,
to
that
enrich
doesn't
it.
that doesn't make sense to what you just said. You can't take off
It
at
does.
peak RPM because you don't have the power. Peak RPM by definition is best power mixture.
Is maximum. Okay.
And look, if you're taking off from a low altitude airport, then we use an excessively rich mixture to provide additional detonation margin. But if you're taking off from a 7,200 foot airport,
There is
you
none.
know,
There is
you're at low cruise power when
At
you're at
best.
full throttle. So maximum RPM is exactly where you want to be.
Okay, how
That's
about cooling?
performance.
Do we need to worry about the engine getting too hot if we're at peak RPM, or just
Do you have an
watch
engine
it?
monitor?
You always have to worry about it, but my guess is it's not going to be a problem.
Because you're
Okay.
not making as much power
Yeah.
as you would at sea level.
Because you're making
And you can monitor that.
70% power or less.
Yeah, you lean to the max power, take off, and as you're taking off in the initial climb out, if the CHTs are coming up a little bit, you can increase the mixture, richen it as needed to keep the CHTs down.
But she's worried about being in this rough region. She says when she richens it on climb out, there's a region where it doesn't run well. So she's kind of between a rock and a hard place.
No,
No, I thought this was just on the ground.
It's only at this 1300 to 1600 RPM that it's not
Correct.
running well, right?
Correct.
Yeah,
Which is not a flight RPM.
right.
You're never
Correct.
going to be in that
Okay.
range in flight. The one thing that it occurs to me might do, and this is triggered by Paul's
I'm always a trigger.
comment about carburetors and jets. And by the way, Paul, there are two jets in the carburetor.
You said that.
There's the normal jet, and then there's the
Yeah.
idle circuit.
That's what I was talking about.
You talked to
and
two jets.
and so it would be worth doing an RPM rise test and seeing if the idle mixture is correctly adjusted.
Oh, yeah. That's a good idea.
That's pretty much the only adjustment you have on that carburetor is the idle
Yeah.
mixture adjustment.
So it might be
But-
too rich, is what you're saying? Or
Well, you know at low idle with a warm engine, you slowly retard the mixture and watch the tachometer, and you should get a small RPM rise before the engine starts to stumble and threaten to quit. And that RPM rise should be somewhere in the 50 RPM vicinity. And if you get a much bigger rise, if you get more than 100 RPM rise, then that says that the idle mixture is too rich.
yeah.
And if you don't get a rise, or you get way less than 50
Or it just
RPM,
dies.
or if it just dies, then
It's
the
too
idle
lean.
mixture is too lean, and it's just a little needle valve adjustment on the carburetor. And that's pretty much the only adjustment that there is on the carburetor. And that's something that the carburetor guys, when they overhaul the carburetor, can't really adjust. It has to be adjusted on the airplane. So it is possible that the new carburetor was installed, but there was never
Wasn't
an
adjusted.
RPM rise test to adjust that.
Yeah.
So that would be worth doing. And just the next time you come in from a flight, and you have a nice warm engine, throttle it back to low idle, which is typically like 800 RPM or something, and then very slowly retard the mixture and see how much RPM rise you get before the engine starts to stumble.
It actually, it should, when you pull the throttle all the way back, it should idle about 600 to 650. What Mike is saying is true. At 800 is a good place to do this test, but
You should get less.
I'll do presentations at some of these events with the high performance airplanes, and I'll find out people think that their idle speed is 1,000 RPM because that's what they use to taxi.
And their brakes are worn.
I was like, no.
But that is another adjustment on the carburetor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I lied. It's not that's the only fuel related
yeah.
adjustment,
Yeah.
but the idle RPM stop is also an adjustable stop screw. So
You want both of those set correctly. You want to be able to pull it back to the 600 RPM idle speed so that when you're on final and you need the engine to come all the way back so you can actually get slow enough to land, it will do that. And the mixture that Mike is talking about, it's a pain to do because you typically have to take cowling on and off every time you make the adjustment. You don't want to do it on a cold engine. It needs to be on a warm engine. But yeah, that should definitely be checked. But in terms of what we were saying before, the takeoff and climb, I think it's probably great. Do you have an engine monitor?
Okay, so just I'm one partner of four, and you've sold me, and I think I can convince another one. And the other two are basically, we've been flying for so many years now. We don't need no stinking engine monitors.
Wait till you have to change the engine out.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I think if all you have is just, do you even have a cylinder head temperature gauge of any type?
Yeah.
We do. It's got the green range, and it's, 2 numbers.
Yeah, it has the top. It has the red line at what, 460 on yours.
It's measuring one cylinder.
Yeah,
one cylinder. Yep, the hottest usually.
Well, I mean that may if that's all you have. I think even at 7,200 feet, unless it's a really cold day where your density altitude is something below 5,000, I don't think you're in much danger of detonation. But lean it for best power, take off, and during that takeoff and initial climb, if the CHTs look like they're climbing, enriching in small amounts just to maintain that CHT, you'll be fine.
Okay. Yeah, if our density altitude is below 5,000 feet, the pilot doesn't function. So, that's well below freezing. Our standard temperature is freezing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Is this
Alaska or Colorado?
0320
New
or
Mexico.
0360?
Oh, New Mexico.
It's a 360.
Yeah, 360.
It's an 0360 F1A6.
It's a pretty oddball engine.
Updraft carburetor. Yeah, because the landing gear has to come up.
Yeah.
That would be nice. Paul, do you know the compression ratio on that engine? Is that an 8.5 to 1 engine, or is that?
I think it's an 8.5 to 1. I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure it's 8.5 to 1.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good engine. It's not your typical 0360.
But
like
I can't see on takeoff from a 7,200 foot field that there's any detonation issues whatsoever.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you could lean it wherever you want on most days. And not worry about detonation.
Where you want should be about maximum RPM, because that's max power mixture.
Yep.
Well, Lori, I sympathize with you because I don't like change. And if it's different when you get it back from the shop and something's different, that bugs me to no end. So
sure.
I completely understand, but hopefully we put your fears at rest here.
Yeah, get the idle speed and idle mixture checked.
Okay, well, thank you.
Okay, thanks so much for calling in.
Our next question is from John, who might be experiencing morning sickness. Hopefully not. Let's find out. Hey, John.
Hi. Hey, thanks for doing this podcast. I've really learned a lot.
We do too.
So not to beat the leaning and lead topic totally into the ground, but my partners and I have an RV7A with about 345 hours on the airframe and engine, which is an 0360 carbureted. And we've got an EMS, Dynon EMS. I've been bore scoping the cylinders at each condition inspection, and we've been noticing an increase of lead buildup, including on the exhaust valve stems. At least one of them. I try to peek in there. I don't get very good photos, but number 4 in particular looks like it's got some white on it. Yeah, that's one of them. I'm not sure which one. So anyway, we do lean aggressively for taxi. And since hearing your podcast about being able to run carbureted Lycomings, lean a peak, we've been doing that in cruise, and that's been maybe the last 20, 30 hours. So I'm thinking that where this lead came from is a combination of not running lean for a few hundred hours. And then also our CHTs have never been up to the level that you recommend for avoiding sticking valves. In the winter, they're like around 300. And in the summer, even we barely get up to 360 on 1 or 2 of the cylinders. So I got concerned because the engine was running rough for a couple minutes after start. a friend of ours who has an RV9A with an 0320 was using something called Decalin, which I think is the same as STP, at his mechanic's recommendation. And he said that, well, this can prevent lead buildup and even clear out lead. So I was wondering what your take on that is. And I've also been told that just running Lena Peak can reduce lead. So I'm wondering about all that stuff.
To the best of my knowledge, nothing can clean off lead other than emery cloth or
Or a chisel.
Scotch-Brite or something. I don't think there's any way you can remove lead once it's built up. But I have to say, looking at those photographs, that's one of the least leady looking Lycomings I've ever seen.
Yeah.
The
I don't
seats
know.
are making good
I don't
contact.
know why, but Lycoming engines seem always to have more lead buildup than Continental engines. When we look at them under the borescope, I don't know why. And that engine seems
Looks great.
Yeah, that's
for a Lycoming seems to have very few deposits.
You should see pictures of my engines. They don't look like that. It looks like some gold-plated,
okay.
encrusted.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
this
these
looks
look
clean.
pretty good to me.
I did see the white spots on the valve stems that you were mentioning, but it doesn't look really that bad.
Yeah, that's the one right there.
Yeah,
Oh,
I saw
that's
it
not
on the
bad.
edge a little bit, but
And
the underside of the valve looks good.
Yeah, you look at that picture
See?
that's up there now. The underside of the valve, you can
It's
see the
perfect.
black contact area,
Yeah.
and
That's wonderful.
it looks like it's making really good contact with the seat, as far as we can see on the photograph. So I keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, looks good to me.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's
I mean-
that's good.
The thing is, all those deposits in there, as long as the exhaust valve is making good contact with the valve seat, which yours appear to, that's that dark ring. You'll see it on the seat and on the valve. If that contact area is good and solid and continuous, the other gunk that's in there, it's not really gunk, the crusty stuff that builds up on top of the piston sometimes and maybe in the cylinder head, they really don't hurt anything. It's just kind of there.
It's reducing your combustion area, though. So
Yeah, I mean,
the only part
Yeah.
of this whole thing that bothers me at all is the fact that you say your CHTs are quite low.
yeah.
Mhm.
And
is low.
I'm wondering if there's anything you can do
Right.
about that. I take it that the RV doesn't have cowl flaps, right?
No, we don't have cowl flaps. And one thing that was recommended to me by another pilot who did have a case of stuck valves is to block the air outlet at the bottom of the cowl. Block it partially.
Exactly what I was
increase it.
about to suggest.
Okay. My only hesitation about that is that it's really easy to get over 400 CHT and climb, particularly on number 3. And so I kind of have to baby it on climb out, even in the winter to keep the CHTs reasonable.
Yeah, 420 is acceptable on a Lycoming in climb. I wouldn't want to go above that. And you might want to block it off with like duct tape or something.
It is experimental.
Just as an experiment to see get the blockage to where you like it, because you're basically adjusting the cooling airflow and the cooling drag.
It's too bad there are no cowl flaps.
If you can find a sweet spot, then you can get rid of the duct tape and put a piece of aluminum there.
So something to consider, we talked about blocking the outlet. You might also, as opposed to that, partially block the inlet, which is what most people do. Matter of fact, on the Cessna, like the Skylane and 172s, the winterization kit is actually a piece of aluminum that you screw onto the cowling air inlet.
Wow.
That partially blocks the air, how much air comes in. And as an experimental, you can experiment with maybe blocking off part of the right air inlet or part of the left air inlet, as opposed to both of them. And you can change the airflow through the engine. You may find that you can do something that actually helps that number 3, which is the right rear. Typical Lycoming engine, it's going to run the hottest. On my twin Comanche, they did, but that was I guess that was partly because that's where the oil cooler was. But at any rate, you can do a lot of things. Careful and slow application, small bit at a time, to see what the results are.
And you may also find that blocking the inlets may make it more efficient in cooling, because there is a magic ratio between the inlet area and the outlet area. There was a great article written in, I think, I'm not sure what publication, but I have a scan of it. It was written by an engineer who did all kinds of research about the frontal area of the inlet and then the exhaust area, and you want a certain ratio. And if you look at high performance aircraft like a Lancer 360, that the cowlings are, modified. They have these very small round inlets, and you'd think, wow, there's not enough air going in that engine to provide cooling, but it's actually tuned to give you just the right amount of cooling. So smaller isn't necessarily less cooling. Smaller could increase the airflow. So just
Racing
do
people
everything
think like this.
Do everything in small increments is what I would recommend. I played around with my Skybolt, which has these big open inlets, and I think I was able to partially block some of the air going into cylinder one, and it forced more air up over the cylinder and into the back of the engine where I needed it. So it's kind of fun to do on an experimental. I don't do that on my
John,
certified.
is your oil cooler, does it get its air from behind it, cylinder 3, like Paul's twin Comanche did?
Yeah, it does.
So I wonder whether partially blocking the airflow into the oil cooler. I don't know what your oil temperatures are like, but if you seem to have plenty of oil cooling, you might possibly want to
Winterization kit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I put a shutter over the outlet to the oil cooler in the summer.
That should in the summer.
In the summer?
Sorry, winter. Sorry.
In the winter.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Yeah.
And when you close that shutter to reduce the airflow through the oil cooler, does that help the cooling of cylinder 3? Have you ever noticed?
Well, I haven't checked that.
It
That
probably does.
would be interesting to look at.
Yep.
There's all kinds of data
Yeah.
you can collect. More
You can
excuses
just-
to fly.
The other thing we did is the baffling kit had these vertical plates in front of each front cylinder,
Right.
and because we were also getting number 1 and 2 a little too warm, we removed that one, and I've read since that can have the opposite effect. That actually those
that's
plates
usually
help
not a
cool.
good idea,
Yeah.
Okay.
because we're not trying to cool those cylinders with ram air. We're trying to just get high pressure on top of the engine and have the airflow vertical from top to bottom. So that the reason for those plates is to not allow the front cylinders to be cooled by the air blast, because that's basically robbing cooling
Wasting
air from the rear cylinders. It's to prevent the front cylinders from hogging all the cooling.
One thing I always wondered is why don't we have like a fence right down the middle of the case so that the cooling air that comes in one inlet only cools that bank? Because I do notice that
I've often thought that would be a good.
the air
It
does
actually-
cross.
It
over.
actually exists on the later models of the Cessna 210.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
it soft baffling or is it?
No, it's a hard metal
really?
well, it has soft baffling
Yeah,
as well,
on
but yeah,
top.
it is separated left and right.
That would
The
be
question
fun.
is, which direction is the baffle seal bend when it hits the top
Yeah,
cowl?
that's good.
It has two. It goes both directions.
Oh,
It
cool.
Oh,
splits.
really? Oh,
Yeah, it
okay.
splits in a Y shape.
So
Oh,
just
cool.
another way that you could put
I
the
didn't-
top on
yeah.
wrong.
What is
Yeah.
that? That's with the T210Rs or something?
No, it's in the in models, later versions.
Interesting.
It's actually somewhat of an inconvenience from a maintenance standpoint, but I don't know that it helps or hinders either way. The biggest problem, sorry, getting way off topic here, but the 210 has this huge gap between the cowling nose bowl and the spinner. All that compressed air comes forward
Yep.
and spills out around the spinner.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of different engine upgrades that we do, putting a 550 on. And one of the big advantages is with the different propeller, we can adjust the position of the spinner and get it within like 1/8 of an inch of the cowling. And that dramatically changes how much cooling loss we have, because it forces it to stay in.
That's why the newer designed airplanes have
Oh, yeah.
those nose bowls with little bitty holes way
Yep.
out towards the edges, and
Yep.
so the air can't come out the middle.
I put a baffle behind my Cardinal spinner that prevents that air from spilling out. My cowling was actually you could see the color on the cowling where the hot air was spitting out, and it was changing, the paint over years.
Wow.
Yeah, it's definitely a phenomenon. I've seen tufted cowls for the Cardinal, and you can see that air just come right back out. But that baffle behind the spinner, which is it's fiberglass screwed to the spinner, the bulkhead for the
Backplate?
spinner.
Yeah, the aft
Yep, the
bulkhead.
back plate. And then it's got soft, silicone baffling that lays against the case.
Oh,
and it
that's cool.
seals that area. It's a big leak.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's all kinds of stuff you can do. You can also build a plenum for your experimental that basically screws down and covers the top, so you don't have to worry about
Yeah.
sealing against the top cowl. I've seen experimentals like that, and that's the ultimate. But you have to be
Yeah,
pretty handy at fiberglass.
Well, back
Yeah, our
when
spinner is real close to the cowling.
That's
Yep.
good. That's good
back
building.
when our legacy airplanes were designed, they didn't have the technology to really know what the airflow was doing. They couldn't put a little CCD camera under the cowl and watch tuft it and stuff like we can do now. So there's a dramatic difference between newer designed airplanes and the old legacy airplanes that, well, I don't know. Paul is now flying a newfangled airplane.
Newfangled.
Yeah, Part 23 airplanes.
Yeah. It's wonderful. Experimental world, though, you can do all kinds of
can do
things, and you don't
all
even have to. You don't have to get high quality aviation grade duct tape. You can get that old cheapy stuff downtown.
The silver stuff. Yeah.
We got lots of that.
Just don't leave it on there. Don't leave it on there too long, because it's really hard to get the glue off.
Yes. Yes.
Well, thank you for the question, John. Appreciate you participating in the podcast.
Keep an eye on that morning sickness. You can see it in your engine data. If you download your data, you'll see one cylinder's EGT doesn't come up very quickly, and that'll tell you which cylinder it is. And Lycoming Service Bulletin 388 Charlie will tell you how to clean out the valve guides with the cylinder on the engine. And they tell you should do it like every 200 hours.
But those valves look pretty clean to me.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, but it's good if you're concerned.
Yeah,
and you see it in the data.
Yeah,
There's a procedure.
Yeah. It doesn't involve removing cylinders.
I
really not
did
too
that.
bad.
Yeah, I did. I did that check. I didn't see too much difference in the EGT rise, so I guess that's a good sign.
Okay.
Okay,
Good job.
Okay.
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for
Appreciate
all of
the call.
that input. I got a lot to work on. Okay, and thanks for the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for the call, John.
Our next question is from Dave, who has a cylinder that's experiencing hot flashes. Go ahead, Dave.
Oh gosh, this sounds
Hey,
dangerous.
folks, thanks for having me. Really delighted and excited to talk to the experts. We're talking about my standard velocity RG with an IO 360 Lycoming in the rear, in this case, that during cruise flight, oftentimes a couple of hours into the flight, and I've sent you an example of this, I'll see the hottest two cylinders start to climb in temperature until it gets to the point where I take action, which for me is my hard limit is 420 degrees cylinder temperature. I normally run quite lean of peak in cruise, and I do have two electronic ignitions on this, so I can lean it pretty aggressively and still get a real smooth running engine. And I'm just curious as to what could be changing, because I look at the data and I can't see anything else that's changed to to cause these cylinders to just start creeping up. I'll cool them down, and sometimes the cycle will repeat, sometimes it won't. So I'm looking for good information, things to try. It is an experimental airplane, so I can play around.
So what's being displayed here for people that are either looking at the picture or aren't used to looking at this stuff, we have EGTs on the top, and then we have CHTs on the bottom. And on the top, it's very distracting because you see a big blue jaggedy line. That's the fuel flow. It's a little bit noisy, but the fuel flow, when he goes to cruise, the EGTs kind of level out, and you'll see there's only 3 because EGT2 is registering 0. You have a probe issue. But you
That's
have 3
correct.
The 3 EGTs are nice and even. They're close together. They're happy. You can tell he's in cruise. If you were on the website, you could change and look at which altitude. It's 10,500. And your fuel flow starts, you start at around, am I looking at the right one here? Yeah, you start around like 10 and a half. And I see the fuel flow gradually drop off to an average of like 9-ish. Because it's jumping around.
Could I just direct your attention though to the pressure altitude? And I think we actually talked about this one before because this is a climb scenario.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I'm really focused on cruise scenarios.
Well, this one you are in cruise, and the place we're talking about between 35 minutes and an hour 30, you're steady cruise at 10,500, 10,400.
Yes.
Okay. And everything's stable except CHT3 just starts marching up. It starts around 380 and it ends up at the end 414 and then you start to climb and then it goes high.
Yeah.
But it's not steady. The other ones are steady in this case, but CHT3 just wants to keep going up.
But it where the actual event happens,
he starts a climb. He actually starts a climb there.
Yeah.
So that's why it goes and jumps above 425, but it is not stable like the other ones. And I assumed that was what he was asking the question about.
Right.
Well,
yeah. The flight that I had focused on was
definitely drifting down.
Yes.
Yeah.
The only thing I
There's
could
another
see.
example in the data.
Okay. I can take a quick peek at that. You said that was June 11th, 2020. So, but the only thing changing in the one that we've got up on the screen while I go and pull up the new data is that the fuel flow is gradually dropping, and that cylinder seems to react the strongest. Okay, let me look at the other one just quick. I didn't see it as pronounced in the one you're calling out. I'm looking at that entire flight, and CHT3 again is higher than the others, but I don't see it as pronounced moving up. But again, yeah, your fuel flow is kind of noisy. I don't know, CHT3 just seems really sensitive to the fuel flow.
Well, I'd sure like to see a gammy lean test on that engine.
Yep.
To see if 3 is an outlier.
Yeah, it would be nice. Yeah.
I have done that, and I've not seen any big outlier effect on it. And I've also done the old standard test where I pull the injectors, the air nozzles out, run them into a cup, and then weigh each cup. After a period of time, and they're pretty much dead even. I can't see any difference there.
Have you done an in-flight induction leak test?
No.
It's one of my favorite tests.
It's pretty simple too.
It's really simple. Lycoming, I don't know what the gaskets are made of, but the gaskets on the induction pipes where they attach to the cylinders over time, especially, seem to get really brittle and they'll tear. Mm-hmm. And you're not turboed, right? This is just
I am not turboed.
IO 360.
360, I think.
Was it 0360 or an IO 360?
IO 360.
IO
sorry.
360. Okay.
It's an angle valve 200 horse engine.
Yep. Great
Okay.
engine.
Yeah. Those gaskets can get a little tear, and sometimes they'll act like a one-way check valve. So your induction system is always in a vacuum. So air can get sucked in on just one cylinder and make it run leaner. Now, if you're running lean of peak, then it's going to make it run even leaner, but it's going to make your CHTs go down and not up. So this may be, just a rabbit, chasing a little
Rabbit hole.
rabbit here, but it's still a very informative test to do. You do the gamey lean test that Mike talks about. Then you do this test where you go to an altitude at wide open throttle, where the ambient pressure is basically the same as your manifold pressure, maybe 7,000 feet or so, and you're running 23 inches of manifold pressure, wide open throttle, and everything's even. Let all the EGTs stabilize, and then pull the throttle back about 7 or 8 inches, which that's going to be a long way, so everything's going to slow down. Let the EGT stabilize again and see not so much how far they go, but which direction they go. And you can do it lean a peak. I would tend to do rich a peak for this particular test. And the one that has a leak or a problem is going to go in an opposite direction than the rest of them.
Sure.
And you can't do this in the shop. You can put pressure on mechanics. We always tend to put pressure in the induction system and look for leaks. But if you have this little torn gasket, pressurizing the induction system will actually close that valve.
Sure.
You can put enough pressure, to make it open, but you may create other leaks as well. But this is an easy in-flight test. It's non-invasive at all, and it's kind of cool to do.
Yeah, that's a very easy test to do, and I'll try it. Any other ideas?
Well, I looked at the other flight and I really didn't see any kind of smoking gun. Like we said, it'd be nice to calibrate what we're looking at with controlled tests like we've been talking about. But in the data that Ian was just showing, the only thing I can see is that the fuel flow is slowly drifting down.
It is.
I'm not sure why. The fuel pressure is slowly changing too, if you looked at that, which might be why the flow is.
Yeah, but
down.
if you think about it, in a carbureted 4-cylinder engine, what could cause one cylinder to be different than the
It's
others?
not carbureted. It's
Oh,
injected.
it's injected. Ah,
So
that's
there
right.
you
I
go.
keep-
What
I
would
keep
cause-
making that mistake.
Why would one cylinder be more affected than the others? The only thing is where it is on the peak curve maybe would be affecting it. That's the only thing I can think of. Which is why a gammy test would tell you.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
why
and
would the fuel flow
tried
make
hard
that
to
slight
check.
change over time?
I don't think when I cruise with my IO360 at 10,000 feet, I'm a lot leaner than 9.5-ish gallons.
Yeah,
I'm more
that's-
like
that's
down
fairly
7.5.
Yeah.
So you might be right near peak on, or just over peak on one cylinder, and so it's drifting back to peak, and that would make the CHTs rise.
What's your RPM though?
23?
Yeah, I'm running 25, 26 on a fixed pitch prop.
So you need more fuel.
So
is
I'm
what you're
running a
saying.
higher RPM.
Good point. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And is your RPM
Yeah, so
pretty stable?
That's,
sorry?
that's-
Yes, RPM is stable. I looked at that.
RPM is stable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Manifold pressure is stable.
So we're not doing a
Altitude is stable.
manifold,
Yeah,
a ambient pressure climb or descend without really
No.
no,
realizing
sir.
it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
No, Paul, I've looked pretty hard to make sure this data is clean. And it's confusing, and I'll, like I say, I'll richen it up to get the temperatures back under control. I get them down to the hot cylinder in 390, 380, set it back, and then it'll be maybe a half an hour, maybe not at all, or maybe an hour later into the flight, it'll do it again.
That's weird.
Yeah.
The
I
only
didn't mean
time
to play
I've
stump the chumps with you. You're not chumps. You're the experts.
no, I once had an issue with my IO360 where I saw CHT3 just start climbing when everything was stabilized out, and it was preceded by the EGT starting to drop on this cylinder, which you don't have a problem here. I don't see that, and it was caused by an oil control ring on that cylinder that had broken and was allowing oil into the combustion chamber, and I don't know whether, I guess it was detonation. Something was going on in that cylinder. The CHT would just run away. I could smell oil burning. I'd look down. My CHT had just gone through 430, and I'd be freaking out and adding fuel. And the solution there was replacing the cylinder, which was my hottest cylinder, which is probably your hottest cylinder. Well, it is, obviously.
This is, yes.
And the rings had just stuck in the lands because the oil had gotten all coked up in there and broke. And so it was allowing too much oil in the combustion chamber. And I'm not sure what that's doing to the combustion, but it was basically acting in an uncontrollable fashion, which I call detonation. But Lycoming didn't know what it was. GAMI didn't know what it was. JPI didn't know what it was. I knew what it was when I took the cylinder off because it was a mess. So, but I don't know about the age on your engine and everything like that, but it was the same. But I saw the EGTs drop and the CHTs rise, which I think is detonation. I think that's what's happening when you start to detonate. And I met this guy, Mike Bush, and one of the first questions I asked him when I met him was like, what's my engine doing? And it took pulling the cylinder to figure it out. But I'm not trying to create a doom and gloom scenario for you. But when your CHT is doing something that you don't understand and everything else is stable, that is something that I have experienced.
Well, this particular engine, as it turns out, is since I have, asked this question, this engine is now in for an overhaul, and I've not seen any issues on the cylinders at this point.
It looks okay.
It looks okay. That looks okay. Other things are not so okay, but we're working on it.
Okay.
How is the cam?
But the cam was fine. The cam,
How many hours?
and the cylinders are fine.
Has anybody ever seen a situation where a lifter is not
It's deflated? Or
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of what could affect one cylinder.
injectors?
I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a
Yeah.
case of a lifter that
No.
would deflate an hour into a flight.
Only if the oil temperature were changing.
Well, it probably is.
I
The
don't-
only thing that I've been able to come up with, and I've got to do some work to verify this theory, is that it's an airflow issue, an intake airflow issue.
Well,
That,
I was going
this-
to ask you, so you have a backwards engine,
I do.
or excuse me, pusher, BPC here,
Tractor.
a pusher
Yeah.
engine. And I am totally unfamiliar with the airflow. And we were talking to a previous caller about the oil cooler on a typical tractor installed 4-cylinder Lycoming. The oil cooler is often physically mounted just behind the number 3 cylinder, the right rear cylinder, which would be technically your front left cylinder.
Front. So,
Is your oil cooler, how is it mounted? Is it totally remote?
well, I've got two
Okay.
oil coolers. One of them is behind, in my case, behind, in your case, in front of my number 2 cylinder. Okay. And the other one is up in the nose for cabin heat, which doesn't work. No cabin heat.
Okay.
But it does help cool the engine. The cooling setup for the rest of it is 2 NACAs on the roof of the airplane that feed into a plenum on the top of the engine, which is a top-down cooling setup.
Right.
And, it's occurred to me that what could be happening is a slight change in the angle of attack, causing differences in airflow entry into the NACA, but I have not done
So
enough
you have
to verify that.
NACA scoops actually on top of the cabin.
That's correct.
That seems like a terrible place to put NACA scoops.
I know it doesn't,
Because
it, but they
you
work
could mask 'em.
fabulous. I had armpit scoops originally when I built this airplane, and I flew with them for probably 1,000 hours. Went to the NACAs and I saw an immediate drop, big drop in cylinder head temperature and better performance.
Except for number 3.
Yes, and I did an oil study on the NACAs to confirm that the airflow is entering the way it's supposed to, and it just looks perfect.
That's interesting.
It is. It's just, really, you wouldn't think they'd work up there at all, but they actually work really well in this particular installation. They work well.
But
The air
over
apparently is attached enough on the top.
over a long period of time, an hour of flight, you're definitely going to have a lower angle of attack because of the lighter weight of the airplane.
Should work.
That's going to
better.
change airflow. But if that were the case, it would happen on every single flight. Or you could go up and duplicate it with half fuel.
Yeah. And not only that, Paul, but it would happen gradually over time, whereas this happens over a period of a few minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But why would it
I
affect
have
just
not
one
been able to solve
cylinder?
this. I'm sorry?
Why would it affect
I'm saying,
one
why would it
cylinder?
affect just
Well,
one
just
cylinder?
maybe there's some sort of odd.
There is, if you look
flow
carefully at the
through
data,
there.
number 4 is going up a little bit too, which is the other forward cylinder. And so, you know, I'm not going to claim that it certainly is by far most dramatically shown on number 3. But it's a confusing problem.
Yeah.
Well, I think maybe do some of the tests that we recommended. I mean, I'd be happy to look at your data again if you want to send some test data.
Well, thanks. And
like
Paul,
looking.
I do appreciate the idea of an induction check because, you know, induction issues can be really freaky in a lot of ways too. And that's a good test.
It's fun to do, you know, because nobody ever thinks of it.
Excuse to go flying.
Yeah, exactly. All of this is another excuse to go flying.
That's right.
As if we needed one.
Yeah,
And-
exactly.
And the principle of the test is that when you're at wide open throttle, even if you have a massive induction leak, it doesn't make any difference because the pressure inside and outside are the same. And when you throttle back
You change the
8
difference.
or 10 inches, you're creating a big vacuum. And so if there's a vacuum, if there's an induction leak, it's going to pass a lot of air.
Yeah.
And
I don't
those,
think I finished the explanation of it, did I? Yeah, thank you, Mike.
and those tests are described on Savvy's site under resources. You can find more details about.
It's the article where it has the actor that played House has his picture on the front.
Oh,
Okay.
It's the only way I can remember which one it is.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Hugh Laurie.
okay.
Hugh Laurie.
Very good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I kind of feel like we tried. That was a tough one. These
Yeah.
Oh, I
experimental guys,
appreciate
they
it.
always
You know,
are
just
smarter
trying to
than
get
we are.
ideas on stuff like this is all about how you fix it. And I really appreciate your help.
Yeah, well, thank you for posing the question, and it makes us. You can see the smoke rising in the room as we were all
right.
putting on our thinking caps here.
Can hear the
Okay.
gears turning.
Yeah, no
Sure.
kidding. Okay, well, good luck with that, Dave, and hopefully we hear back from you on what you found.
Thank you much, team.
Okay,
Thanks,
take
Dave.
care.
Appreciate it very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, so we got a great letter that I want to read to everybody. This is from a fan. It says, I don't have a question, but I want to say a big thank you. I have a Beechcraft A36. It's a great airplane with a great engine that has over 1,100 hours. Everything has been running great. Sounds like everything's great so far. And I only consume about a quart of oil every 25 to 30 hours.
Oh,
which is
rub it
impressive.
in.
I
Wow.
am jealous. That's that hurts.
I know. I've owned this airplane for just over 5 years and never had any engine problems. It has lots of power and it does everything I ask. I have a JPI 930 installed and I run at Lena Peak while in cruise, and I'm very judicious about that. I took my airplane into its usual shop for its annual inspection last week. I've been a bit suspicious that this shop was in the business of finding problems that might not exist. But they generally did really good work over the past several years. And it was a case of using the Reagan term trust but verify. This year they went overboard. I got a call and the mechanic told me that all 6 of the cylinders had flunked the compression check in the mid 30s with one at 15, and that the valves were exhibiting signs of, quote, stress. I was not sure what stress meant. Either they were burned or they weren't. Stress is a meaningless term. Replacing 6 cylinders all at once had me asking lots of questions, which is
I
good.
like
We're on a good
this
start.
guy.
him.
Yeah, this is good.
Yeah.
I called one of the mechanics at the American Bonanza Society and asked him some questions. Then I had a friend send me your recent podcast, quote, compression readings are garbage, which is, I love that one. And that made me very skeptical of the major surgery that my mechanic wanted to do. Yesterday, I took my airplane to a new shop on the field, and it was time for a second opinion. They did the same run-up, compression check, and borescope inspection, and they called me and said, Jim, you do not need any new cylinders. You have 2 valves that need to be replaced. That's it. So I'm moving forward with those repairs and saving thousands of dollars in the process. Thousands. He's so excited.
Saying he's got 2 bad valves, but doesn't have to have any cylinders replaced. Sounds like that shop wants to lap them, which is really good.
great.
Maybe we're
Yeah.
getting our
Better.
message out.
Yeah.
Oh,
Dude, I
you
just
know
wanna
how you
thank
can you know how you can tell mechanics that are in the business of finding problems where none exist?
How?
They have IA after their signature.
Oh, I
Yeah,
thought you were
it's
going to
their
say
job.
they get kickbacks.
That's right. So you guys are, I mean, this is like meaningful change here. I mean, this, like
there really
literally.
is.
That's
That's
great.
That's
very
awesome.
heartwarming to
Yeah.
hear
He
an
was doing
activist
everything
owner
right.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was listening to his intuition. The airplane had been running fine for years. Why would all six go wrong?
Yeah.
It just didn't
Yeah.
make any sense.
And I
Yeah, all
and I
six
and I bet that first shop did an ice cold compression test probably.
Or they did the compression chest test with the spark plugs out or something goofy like. Look at
Oh,
these
you mean you're not
numbers.
supposed to take both spark plugs out when you do compression?
Even I would catch that one. I mean, come on.
Yeah. So
Oh,
So that's great.
that is great. And I don't know the two shops, but the second one was paying attention. That's really
Well,
great.
you know, he was really lucky that he had two shops on the field.
That's
because
true.
there's be a lot of airports.
Yeah.
There's one shop on the field,
and you're stuck.
You're
Yeah.
stuck.
That's true. You could tow
Good.
it, right? So yeah.
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 Yeah. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it for writing
Yeah.
in.
Great
That's
letter.
awesome. So our next question is from Paul, which is always nice. Someone whose name I can remember throughout the entire call. So Paul wants to know what normal looks like. It's you and me, Paul. It's us.
How would you know, Paul? Oh, not you.
Oh,
You.
yeah, the other Paul. Be careful.
Well, the crux of my question comes back to I fly a 1965 Piper Cherokee with the Lycoming 0360. It's a fantastic little airplane. It's got about 1,800 hours on the engine. I recently got very close to having to remove a cylinder. Ultimately, did not have to, which was good.
Awesome.
But it got me thinking that the instrumentation on the engine just is not adequate. It still has mostly stock.
Yay.
So my question for you guys is, as I go out and start looking at and shopping for an engine monitor, what should I be looking for? Well, what are the features I need? What are some of the gotchas that I need to be aware of? For example, gasket probes versus screw-in probes for CHTs. That's been talked about here, and placement. So I was hoping to get into some of the details for everybody about your recommendations on engine monitors.
Oh, this will be fun.
Well, I think all the engine monitors offer both
Screw-in,
gasket and bayonet style probes, or whatever we want to call those things that screw into the well. And hopefully you'll always use the kind that screw into the well, because spark plug gasket probes have issues. One of the things that I think is the most, or is very, very important when you're selecting an engine monitor, is whether it has user programmable alarm settings, or whether they're hardwired to the manufacturer's red line. A lot of the engine monitors that are the fancier ones that are primary instrument replacement, where you take a bunch of steam gauges out and you put this thing in, were certified to be hardwired to manufacturer's red lines, which makes the alarms essentially useless. I don't want to know when my CHT reaches 500. You know, I want to know when it reaches 420 or something like that. So that's one of the things I would definitely look for is user programmable alarm levels. And when you install the engine monitor, make sure that you hook the alarm output to something that you can't miss, like a big red light sitting right in the center of your scan.
Most of them will have like a master alarm.
Yeah.
So you have a light, and you don't know what the alarm is. You just know there's an alarm.
Right.
So
But it makes you look over at the
It
instrument.
makes you look at the instrument. Yeah.
Because normally these instruments are installed on the right side of the panel, that are not really directly in your scan, because you're looking at the flight instruments primarily. And so when the engine monitor senses that something is out of limits, it needs a way to tell you that you can't ignore. And in a perfect world, you'd have both a visible and an oral alarm, you know. But at least a visible alarm that's with a, that's a light that's positioned where you can't miss it, right in front of you, in the middle of your scan someplace.
And
So-
if you can mount it closer to you, that's a really good option.
Like in the center console would be
Center
great under your
console,
radios.
Yeah, something closer. If you get the non-primary, like Mike was talking about, you can pretty much do anything you want to with it. It's really nice and get all the same data. They don't weigh all that much. I don't know that there's any manufacturer of these that's bad.
Yeah, I agree.
There's all sorts of different features, different shapes. You
Different
can get the square
prices.
one, different prices, and round and
Right, real estate
But-
has something to do with it too.
Yeah.
Absolutely,
on your panel, because like the JPI 730 and 830, which I like a lot, they're rectangular and they take like a hole and a half.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But you can get
Um,
the Insight, will fit right in a standard 3
or-
1/8 inch hole.
Isn't a Garmin 275 is the
Yeah,
the
GI
Garmin-
275 and,
I mean-
EIS, that works.
CGR 30P, the Electronics
Yeah.
International,
Yeah,
is a
they
really,
all do
really
really
nice
good.
Yeah,
instrument.
so real estate is really important. Having just put 2 engine monitors in 2 aircraft,
Yeah.
I had to consider where it would fit. Was it could I get it close enough where I could see it? Another thing that I think is that, I don't know about you, but my eyesight's not as good as it used to be.
What?
So the 275, I don't know what the display looks like, but I think I might want a bigger display. So being able to see it and liking how the things are presented. I just put a G3X 17-inch, which can go horizontal or vertical. And I'm just using it for engine monitor, not for everything else that it can do. Trying to keep the
Wow.
price down. And that's a nice big display that fit in my panel really well. And I felt like it was maybe a little bit farther away than I wanted, but it was big enough that I should be able to see things clearly and get the information that I
You
want.
say it's 17 inches?
I think it's a
7-inch.
7. Oh, it's
It's 7-inch, isn't it? GDU
I was
7.
going to say 17 inches, you ought to get Netflix on it.
yeah. Maybe it is the 7-inch. It's fairly small and rectangular. I got the wrong number.
I
Yeah.
assume she meant 7. I just kind of let
Yeah,
it go.
Yeah, okay.
Let me get my
I
ruler
kept
out.
thinking
Yeah, good.
about it.
Sorry.
See, what other
But-
features are there available?
The other thing you want to think of, if you're gonna go all in right off the bat, it's great. But if you're going to go in and say, oh, I just want EGT, CHT, and fuel flow as a starter, and then add other features later, be sure that's an option. And I may be wrong. So all you guys that are Insight fans, I could be wrong. If you get the G2, it is not easily upgradable to a G3 or a G4. You can't always add all those options. I may be wrong on that, but I think I'm correct. But
Yeah,
just be sure that the upgrade path,
fuel flow is very important.
very important.
Very
And-
helpful.
and
Everybody's going to
also,
have,
after reporting on a few forced landings due to loss of oil pressure, I would think an oil pressure sensor where you can get an alarm if oil pressure gets below the bottom of the green. We've just seen a bunch of airplanes come out of the sky, typically because like a mechanic forgot to tighten a B nut. That seems to be like a big one, especially on Lycomings with remote mounted coolers where there's too many B nuts.
Mm-hmm. The more data you can get, the better.
But they all have a lot of data.
They all have a
like
lot.
We were just looking at one where Mike was astonished. What are these things? I don't even know.
Oh
what
yeah,
this was recording.
that thing. That was that a Dynon that we were looking at?
No, it was a G3X.
This is a G3X.
Oh, that was a G3X. Holy mackerel!
Yeah.
Information overload.
It was.
Yeah.
As an engineer,
but
I never believe that you can have too much data.
There you go.
Yeah, but
Oh,
I mean,
you're
think,
an engineer. I would have totally changed my tone had I known
when
that
you
from the start.
configure the engine monitor and decide what sensors to put on it. Think about what things you would like to be alarmed if they go out of range, and so like oil pressure is one of those things. You'd really like to get knocked upside the head if the oil pressure drops below the bottom of the green.
Mm-hmm.
In that same vein, knowing that the alternator is still producing current would be helpful.
Yeah.
Well, so I have a little different. What kind of engineer are you? Let's got to
Mechanical.
establish this.
Mechanical.
Mechanical. I would. The current output to me is not particularly important, and I'm an old school avionics guy from way back when.
No, the bus voltage is what's important.
The voltage is what you want to know.
That tells you whether you're on battery power
Everything.
or alternator power.
Yeah. If it's putting
Yeah,
out
that's true.
14 volts, it's doing its job. You don't care how much current it's putting
Right,
out.
and a lot of airplanes do have a low volt light or something like that. But
Yeah, that's usually too late, but
Your radio starts sounding weird by then.
yeah, knowing what the current is, and that's, your airplane has an amp meter, and all the Cessna single engines all have an amp meter. I don't know why they chose an amp meter. Back in the day, to me, a voltmeter was the simplest thing. But anyway, the voltmeter, if you had to choose between the two, and almost all of them, even the simplest, will give you voltage because it's monitored. It has to have voltage to operate, and it's a real simple circuit to have a voltmeter display.
yeah, all of the engine monitors
Yeah.
will monitor bus voltage because that doesn't require a sensor. That's the thing is powered by the bus, and it's going to measure the bus voltage.
You don't have to have a shunt located somewhere in the airplane.
Right.
What about touching on sensors? Are there different types of sensors? I mean, is there? We talked about the different types of CHT probes, but what about fuel flow sensors? Are there different styles of those?
All fuel flow sensors are made by a company named FlowScan.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they're all the same.
Pretty basic.
They have a monopoly.
And the transducers are pretty much the same. You're not going to have a lot of choice. If you buy Garmin, you can pretty much use anybody's sensor and wire it up to your Garmin. But if you get EI or JPI, they will come with sensors, transducers, all that stuff.
Okay.
Don't over torque anything. Just, I might know a guy.
Yeah, you could have different sensors for RPM. Some will use Hall effect sensors that are on your prop, and some will use
well,
on the mag.
No.
On the mag?
So they're on the mag. They're measuring
Yeah, but there are some that will put a little. This is not in the normal world, but they'll glue a magnet onto the rotating mass, and it watches for that, which is totally ridiculous. My favorite, and it's not done this way anymore, but there's a company called Horizon that made a Horizon 1000 tachometer.
Oh yeah.
And I had a single engine Comanche long time ago, and it would actually count the pulses on your P leads. So
Right.
you'd wire it to your ignition switch, which is wonderful. And so for a 4-cylinder engine like yours, each magneto P lead gets 2 pulses per revolution. Well, in the world of measuring, counting is always more accurate than measuring. So if you can count something, you're way less likely to have an error. And it would count both P lead pulses, which can be pretty significant. You do not want to grab hold of the P leads while the engine's running. I just tell you that right up
Word
front.
of advice.
They only go to 300 volts. They don't go to 30,000 volts like the high tension.
Right. And so almost any failure to a magneto, I can't imagine a failure where a magneto is going to give more pulses per revolution.
No.
So the only failure is that it has less. So anytime either of the two would have fewer counts on the P lead, it would give you a little yellow light saying that you've got a mag failure, which is awesome because you knew exactly which magneto it was, which is very important in taking action.
It's very important that it be hooked to both mags. Otherwise, you couldn't do a mag check because it would go to zero.
Yeah, it would go to zero. And when you did a mag check, if you start at 1800, it would detect that you had switched off a mag, and it would tell you what the drop was. It'd say minus 50 RPM.
Yeah. Nice.
It was great. And unfortunately, I think
And
they're out of business.
it would turn on the light that said that mag failed, right?
That mag failed, and the other one was running, and here's your mag drop.
I didn't know
loved it.
Horizon was gone. Oh, that's a shame.
I tried to order one
Because
for
those are
somebody.
really popular.
Oh yeah, they were awesome. But I think that's how all of them should track RPM. Go to the P leads but I don't know. I don't know why they want to screw the Hall effect sensor into the mag, because some of them, if you rotate the Hall effect sensor incorrectly, it won't read proper RPM. So anytime you take a magneto out and put it back in, like for a 500-hour inspection, it's real common for them to, go running the engine and come back in and say, I'm getting real flaky RPM readings and stuff.
Interesting.
Anyway,
Well,
maybe one of the engine monitor people will come up with a change.
I'm sure they will.
They probably didn't want 300-volt pulses coming into the cockpit.
Well, they're already there. They're on the ignition switch.
Well, that's true.
Yeah. They just didn't want it going into their monitor.
That's right.
Yeah. Oh, well. Sorry,
There's actually,
squirrel.
there's actually a lot of stuff that goes into the choice of choosing an engine monitor. And
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a wide variety of prices for start, and the fit, and the look, and the features that they offer, and the supportability. Some companies are known to have nicer customer support than others. And
Are you
your
willing to
avionic.
name names?
No, I'm not going to name any names. Because I own some engine monitors from some of those companies, and I still get by, but that might be important to you. And also your avionics shop might make recommendations, because hopefully they're not looking for kickbacks. But oh, sorry, Mike. Going back to our previous discussion, but yeah, they might push you in a certain direction.
Okay.
So,
Anyway.
but the key thing is you're getting an engine monitor.
Yes. Good for you. Good for
These
you.
podcasters I listen to that keep telling me it's a good idea. So
I think you'll really, really enjoy it. The first time I got an engine monitor, it was like analyst TV in my airplane. I was just fascinated by it, and I wasn't flying. I wasn't looking out the window, and it was fascinating. Yeah.
But the other side of the coin, Colleen, is that when you first put an engine monitor in, there's often an oh my god factor. Like,
That
because
CHT
you learn
is really
all
that
sorts
high?
of you learn all sorts of stuff that you didn't know before.
Yeah, ignorance is bliss, and you've been very happy so far.
Yeah.
So just be aware that installing the engine monitor didn't cause any of the problems that it now reveals.
Yeah.
just get that out there right off the bat.
That's true. You'll find it very interesting, though. You'll be very entertained. Don't
I had
forget to look out the window every now and then.
I installed an 830 in a customer's 1963 Comanche, and he flew that thing home and immediately called me up and told me that his engine was going to have to be overhauled. Man, the temperatures were doing all sorts of horrible things were going wrong with this engine. And I said, it's exactly what it did when you flew the airplane here.
Right.
It took a while for him to get over that.
I just was having a correspondence with a aircraft owner who would put a factory rebuilt engine in his airplane and basically destroyed the engine on the first break-in flight, because one cylinder went into serious detonation and started melting the piston and doing stuff, and he was pretty upset. I thought, this would be if this airplane had an engine monitor, none of this would have happened.
Oh, he didn't have an engine monitor?
He didn't have an engine monitor. He didn't know what was going on in that cylinder until it
was too late.
Yeah.
Wow.
Till it wrecked this engine.
That's sad.
Yeah. Well, on a happier note, meanwhile, back at the farm, we can't talk about engine monitors without creating a little drama, to make our point. And Paul has already bought into it, so we're thrilled.
Everybody probably thinks that we get kickbacks from the.
We don't get kickbacks. Full disclosure.
But maybe we should.
Maybe we should.
Maybe we should get
kickbacks from.
Yeah.
Well, I think we ought to let it be known among these 4 or 5 manufacturers of engine monitors that whoever gives us the biggest kickbacks, that's where we're going to recommend.
Somebody might tune in at the end and not know we're joking.
I know where we're going.
Okay.
Oh my goodness.
Ooh, man.
No sponsorship.
Yeah, no sponsor. Yeah, that
We're
would
not
be
that
terrible.
smart.
If we had sponsors, we'd have to be careful what we said. I'm
Yeah.
not
But you know,
very good at that.
the choice of engine monitor is a very personal thing.
Yeah.
You know, like for example, the Insight instruments have a very different looking display than the others, and some people love it, some people hate it. I'm not particularly fond of it, but some people just think it's the cat's meow. So, boy, that's an old phrase.
Yeah.
It must
Find
be
it.
dating me.
Find a wonderful place to put it in your panel, though, where it's up where you can see it, part of your scan.
Yeah.
That's really helpful.
And don't forget to download your data often.
Oh, yes.
It's not just a real-time monitor.
Yeah.
It's a recording device. It's
Yeah.
very powerful for troubleshooting.
You don't have to download after each flight, but download all of your flights.
Yeah.
That history is really important.
Once a month would be really good habit
Yep.
to get into.
When you go out on a Saturday to, pet
Get a
and groom
hamburger.
the airplane.
Download
good
the
time.
data. Yeah.
Yep.
And then some of the engine monitors record their data on an SD card, and if you don't have an SD card plugged in, then they don't record. So that
Yeah,
that would be
yeah.
unfortunate too. So
Yeah. Garmin
we've
has
seen
no
a lot of
onboard-
that.
Yeah, Garmin has no onboard memory, and I think the Insight also requires a card.
really?
I'm pretty sure
I
you're
think
right.
so. Yeah.
The G series use an SD card,
But the JPI has
make-
internal memory.
and they won't complain if you don't plug one in. They'll
They
just
don't ever tell
happily
you.
they'll just happily not record the data.
And you want to set the record rate to 1 per second.
Fast.
Yeah, you want, and if you have a JPI, you can make it record. Is that JPI or EI? You can make them record even faster, but it eats up the memory
Yeah.
huge. So once a second's pretty good. Cool.
Good.
Well, now
All right.
we made it clear as mud. And have you made up your mind yet?
Well, that depends. You'll have to let me know who gets in touch about a sponsorship.
Now you got to do some shopping.
Okay, well,
Yeah. Sponsors aren't always the best. They're just the ones with the money.
Paul, now sally forth and pick an engine monitor.
Yeah. And
I'll do
report
my best.
back. We want to hear what you found.
Will do. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right.
We appreciate the call, Paul.
Oh, and one more thing.
Uh-oh.
I don't know what your timetable is on this, but they often offer big discounts on these things at like Sun and Fun and Oshkosh. So you might
Yes.
want to time it to take advantage of that.
That's a good point.
thinking. Yep.
Yep. I did that. A couple $100. Can't go wrong.
No, definitely not.
Cool. Well, thanks for the question. We love
Yep.
talking about engine monitors. It's something we know.
Thanks for letting us geek out on something we don't have to think about.
That's right.
Happy to do it.
Okay.
Thanks, Paul.
Take care. Well, that's a wrap on another fun podcast. Did we get things right or did we miss the target on some of these questions? I know the answer to that question. We would love to hear from our listeners. Most importantly, please keep sending us those tricky questions and try to stump us. You can email any and all questions and comments to podcasts@aopa.org.
We'll see you.
Bye.